One thing that my grandfather used to say all the time is that if it's important enough, it's important enough to work for. But I actually think, unlike on many other topics, I think in this case my grandfather's a little bit wrong. If it's really important, it's important enough to play for. The things that we really, really care about, the things that we are deeply passionate about, that we find most meaningful in our lives, they don't feel like work. They feel like play. And there's a really important reason for that, and I was going to talk a little bit about this. So my background is not really in healthcare. My background is in, more recently in game design, although I've done a lot of crazy things in my life, including playing a lot of video games just this morning. I actually had an epiphany about games and healthcare, and I'm going to share this series of epiphanies with you. This is the nature of my talk. So I'll just start by saying it was not that long ago, it was just recently, that the World Health Organization made the following statement, that improvements to adherence, patients worldwide would benefit more from improvements to adherence than from the development of new therapies. So what I mean, PowerPoint slide, is that the biggest problem in global healthcare today is not the development of new drugs or new therapies, it's the effective use of the existing ones. That is, we know what to do, we are given the opportunity to do it, something that will save our life or improve our health, and we simply don't do it. 50% of all people who have chronic diseases do not take their medication as directed. And this problem of adherence costs $314 billion in direct and indirect costs, according to the New England Journal of Health, New England Health Institute. That is more money than we spend on cancer, diabetes, and heart disease put together. This is an enormous problem. So why, then? Why do we do the wrong thing? Now, one important reason for this is kind of a technical term, and some of you may be familiar with it, those of you with a psychology background, hyperbolic discounting. It's just an example of the kind of problem that comes from having a 200,000-year-old brain in a nanosecond society, in a nanosecond world. It is the propensity of the human mind to value things more highly that are proximate in space and time than things which are distant. It also encompasses some other things like our inability to assess cumulative effects and things like that. But I like to call it the 10,000 cups of coffee problem. I'm going to drink 10,000 cups of coffee in my life. And I speak to my doctor all the time about my health. And I talk to him like I talk about, yes? I'm very sorry. Is it better? Good, good, good. So I talk to my doctor like I talk about 10,000 cups of coffee. I talk about big picture things. 10,000 doses of caffeine, 10,000 teaspoons of sugar. And I can stand in front of my doctor and I can say, yeah, of course, that's bad for me. I shouldn't do that. I can see the great benefit over the course of my life of eliminating 10,000 doses of caffeine and 10,000 teaspoons of sugar from my diet. And then I walk out of my doctor's office and I'm literally never in the context of 10,000 cups of coffee. I live my world in this context. I live my life in the context of a single cup of coffee. A single, delicious, revitalizing cup of coffee that I have in front of me right now. My wife very, conveniently made this morning when she was getting ready for work. And my life and my habits are all built around the context that I live in, one single cup of coffee. And the reality, of course, is that the cumulative effect of a single cup of coffee is roughly zero. There's no cumulative long-term effect of that one cup of coffee. And so it doesn't make sense. All the motivations that I had in that moment in the doctor's office talking about 10,000 cups are not present in that moment when I'm making a decision. The connective tissue between those moments is very weak. So this is a problem that stems from a 200,000-year-old brain living in a nanosecond world. Think about it. 50,000 years ago, you were going to die tomorrow. You were not going to live to 25. No one was interested in cumulative effects. You could find a giant mountain of Krispy Kreme donuts on the African savannah. You could eat every one of those things, and it was not going to make any difference because you're going to get eaten by a lion tomorrow. And this is where we've come from. This is our legacy. Standing in front of my doctor, you should change your lifestyle. Yeah, I'm totally on that, right? And I go from feeling like this, okay, I'm on it, to feeling like this. I said, sure, It ceases to, the little individual things that I need to do are in and of themselves chores. And in the context of that thing, it's very difficult to find your motivation, the motivation you had thinking about big picture items. Well, I'm glad you asked. Games have always been serious. Games have always been an important part of how we explored and learned about our world. Games, in fact, are fundamental to the human animal. It is I'm serious when I say it's the most profoundly important thing we do, the most profoundly important faculty of the human mind. Without this game, this very most important game ever created, humanity would not exist. How do you teach your children to hide from predators in a production environment? That's a very dangerous thing to do. You want to create simulations. You want to create environments where they can play at hiding from predators and develop their skills slowly over time. Without the development of this emergent behavior, there's this play, and this game is completely universal throughout all humanity. We play it instinctively with babies in the crib by holding our hands over our eyes. But in the modern context, we still play this game. And why? Well, because it teaches us more than just these immediate skills. This girl is learning something really important about that boy. Well, he's a terrible seeker. And probably, maybe, not a very good mate as a result. We learn who is going to show us mercy if they find us too soon. Who is a good sport. Who is a good loser, who's a good winner. These are all really important things that we learn about each other in the course of play. Play is what makes all this possible, what makes our societies possible. It's the interplay between people. Soldiers use chess to learn military strategy. Goat herds in Africa play Mancala to help them get better at estimating the size of their flocks. If you have a pre-numerate civilization, you don't have a sophisticated numbering system or mathematics, how do you keep track of things? Well, you have to get good at estimating. The best way to get good at estimating is to practice through play. Go is a really excellent game if you are trying to develop a global or continental civilization and you want to learn geometry and pattern matching and these kinds of things. It's an excellent game. In fact, I like to mention this example because it is one of the last remaining games where human beings consistently beat computers. Mancala, another name for Mancala is Ayo, and Ayogo is the name of our company. But even hockey, our national pastime, is really a serious sport. How do you keep yourself fit during the winter when there's no farm work to do? You know, developing a sense of camaraderie and practice and hand-eye coordination. This game is a serious game. We've adapted them for our entertainment, but the reality is they're teaching us important things about how to live in the world that we're in. Okay, so I know all that about the history of games because I'm a game designer. So what? So what about health? Well, I was working on a project to develop microtransaction processing systems for a bunch of companies, including Zynga, that makes Facebook games. And we got to see what was actually going on in the background, the underlying infrastructure of these games, if you like, and how they were really making money. Because it's not at all intuitive what is going on there, and in fact, in a lot of ways, it works the opposite way you think. So you think these games are microtransactional games. Maybe many of you know this term, microtransactions. But microtransactions work almost precisely the opposite way you think. You imagine, I'm sure, as I did, that a microtransaction is a player paying a very small amount of money for something in a game. But that virtually never happens. What actually happens is you do things that the game maker wants you to do, and then they pay you. They pay you very small amounts of virtual currency. Virtual goods and virtual items that are a reward for your behavior. They get you to do things that you would swear you would never do. Swear you would never do. In exchange for things you would swear you do not want. Would you send a promotional message to every friend of yours on Facebook about my game? No. Would you spend 20 minutes of your time doing a performance marketing survey? No. Well, would you do it in exchange for a little picture of a sheep? Well, sure, 100 million times every day, yeah. And who cares about sheep? It's about putting you in the right context. The game puts you in a context where taking that next action makes a lot of sense. I don't want a sheep standing here in front of you right now. But if I'm building a farm with my daughter, and we've been working at it for a couple hours, and the thing that we need just to get to that next level is just, we need a sheep. Suddenly, 15-minute performance marketing survey just doesn't seem like that big a price to pay. It's taken the chore, and put it inside the context of something I really care about. recontextualizing. This is what gamification is. It's not about applying points and badges and achievements to things. It is about recontextualizing chores, things that you do not want to do, and putting them inside the context of things that you do want to do. There are 3 basic elements to this I'm going to share with you right now. There's lots of other elements, but there are 3, I think, particularly important ones that are worth talking about. Narrative, progressive mastery, and social relatedness. 3 things that games, especially social games, mobile games, are really, really good at doing and exploiting to get you to act on their behalf, that healthcare just doesn't seem to have got their head around. Now let's take a really simple example. Candy Crush. There's a reason it's not called a workplace deadline crush. Candy is a perfect metaphor for a social game, for a casual social game. Everyone has got an experience of candy. It's colorful, it's delicious, it's basically free. I mean, it's really cheap. You carry it around in your pocket, you share it with your friends. It's a perfect metaphor. It's a narrative that puts you in the right place, in the right state of mind when you come into the game. But narrative can do more than just set the stage. It can actually do some pretty heavy lifting. Yeah, it can do things more important than candy, PowerPoint slides. What it can do is it can help you acquire and retain important information. If I gave my 11-year-old son an Excel spreadsheet that had a list of every character in Lego Star Wars and all of their powers and everything that they could do and told him to memorize the list, you would probably tell me that was child abuse, making him memorize lists of things. But I tell you, my son knows every single one of those characters. He knows them better than me. It's one of the main reasons he beats me all the time. He switches back to the right character all the time. He knows the Sith. He knows everything about them. He knows the entire Fett family. I thought there was only one. No, there's a whole family. And he knows that R2-D2 is really good at picking locks because he did that in the Cloud City in the second movie. And he memorizes all this because the narrative speaks to him. He cares about it. He wants to be a Jedi. This matters to him. And in the context of that passion, that play, he's acquired an enormous quantity of data, information, and made it useful for himself in a context that matters to him. Contrast this with this kind of application. This is the kind of interface, it's actually a real interface, from a glucose logging app that's given to a child newly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. This says nothing about you. It says nothing about who you are and what you're doing and why you're there. There's no narrative here. A child with type 1 diabetes is exposed to a whole new world of monsters. It's a terrifying world. Amputations and daily needle pricks, and it's with you for the rest of your life. It sneaks up on you in the dark. It's hard to understand, nearly impossible to master this condition. Very frightening for a child. But what if those monsters were not your enemies? What if those little monsters could be your friends? What if caring for yourself and caring for these monsters was roughly the same thing? By caring for the monster, you are caring for yourself. You live in a space where entering the information that you need to capture, getting good at recognizing and remembering what your blood sugar readings are in any moment, capturing it for your parents and for your healthcare providers, well, that's part of something that's fun and engaging for you, part of a narrative that can make sense to you, even if diabetes itself is too much for you to master cognitively as a child. Yes, they do, but adults also love stories. And we've built another application. That first was an application called Monster Manor that we built for kids with type 1 diabetes, as well as kids in the obesity program at Children's Hospital here. This is an interface for an application that we built for newly diagnosed type 2 diabetics. And this was one of the first screens they see. And what we heard when we were doing user testing, they said, no one has ever asked us to represent ourselves in our diabetes application before. I mean, you type in your name and you put in your health number or whatever it is. There's no picture of you. You have no avatar in this space. Well, that's crazy. Every game designer knows that's the first thing you do. You give the person a chance to express themselves in the space. When you play Candy Crush, it's always asking you to log into Facebook. Well, one of the reasons is it gets to show you back your own face, which it grabs from your Facebook profile. They care a lot about this, and it allowed us to put the program that they needed to follow, the educational program that they needed to follow as a person newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, in a context. This is them, their virtual selves, they're world travelers. And we spent a lot of time talking to them about what they were afraid of in their diabetes. They're afraid, because you normally type 2 diabetes you get later in life, many of them were afraid they weren't going to be able to travel anymore. They had planned to travel when they were retired and they couldn't do it. They were worried that they weren't going to be able to do it. We created a kind of aspirational narrative about world travel, broke the program up into 12 elements representing 12 cities. And it's a very simple thing, but this narrative really makes a big difference. Helps people feel engaged from moment to moment. A 12-module program is going to take me 9 months to get through. Well, that's pretty hard to commit to up front. Hard to get a sense of where you are and why you're doing it. But if you can tell them a story about, well, now you're in New York, and now you're in Vancouver, and now you're in Toronto, and these are things that people can relate to, and allow them to situate themselves in space and time, which is really the purpose of a narrative. Progression is another thing that games have been really good at. So there's several aspects to progression. One is, well, first of all, it's not enough to know that, I happen to be a green belt. It matters that I used to be a white belt, and I know how I became a green belt, and I can see how to become a black belt. I know what to do next. It's not that I can progress, but how I can progress, and I can develop a sense of self-efficacy. That really matters. I can feel empowered. I know what my next step is. A game that doesn't tell you what you're supposed to do next is a failed game. Right? It sits on your shelf gathering dust. Every game designer knows this. The person needs to see what they need to do next, and it needs to not be easy. We spend a lot of time making things easy in healthcare. Oh, we want to simplify this user interface. We want to make this as easy as possible. Easy, often we say usability, but what we really mean is easy. But easy is not usable. There's no easier instrument to play than the kazoo. But no one writes symphonies for the kazoo. They write symphonies for the violin, an absurdly difficult instrument to play. And that it is hard is what makes it matter. Well, where's the progression here? This is another interface for somebody with diabetes. There's no sense of progression here. Yes, I fill in the thing from top to bottom, but there's no scaling of difficulty. There's no sense of mastery in this space. Games are very, very good at giving you a sense of what you're doing and how you are building it. And each individual action is in and of itself maybe kind of meaningless, but you can see how it fits into the progression over time as you're acquiring the things that you need to build the thing that you care about, the thing that is beautiful. And in Monster Manor for children in the obesity program uses a similar kind of concept. We give them a challenge, they take on that challenge, and they take on a next challenge. It's not about, oh, you have to get 20 minutes more exercise a day for 6 months. No kid's going to respond to that. That's 10,000 cups of coffee. We can give you something to do right now. Something to do right now, and we can give you a reward for it right now. Some feedback that, yes, you are progressing and feel like it fits into a system. We were able to increase the daily activity of kids in their obesity program by 20 minutes a day, just by getting them to focus on taking one action at a time and giving them some feedback about why that mattered and seeing how it fit into a progression over time. They do the thing, they do the exercise, maybe an exercise they've never done before. They try it out, and they get immediately rewarded with a very short little bit of gameplay, just 30 seconds or so. It's a little piñata that they can smash open. The piñata contains ingredients that are for monsters, and collect the monsters and unlock them and share them with their friends, and their monsters become little messengers, carrying messages back and forth between their friends and the people they care about. Children really, really responded to this experience, and when we came back and talked to them about it, it's like they didn't even notice that they'd been exercising. They lost themselves in the flow of it. It works also for adults. Now, part of this reason I'm showing this screen is to show this sort of sense of progression in, again, an application for type 2 diabetics. But I want to point out something really interesting here, that there's a couple of items here that are required to unlock this next bit of gameplay. Two of them, the mystery gifts on the right side of the screen, I actually cannot earn for myself. There's no way for me to earn them. I actually have to go and find another person in the system and get it from them. And the only way the best way to interact with someone else in the system is to reward them for having done something good that they did for themselves. So you go and find somebody who's managing their diabetes effectively, and you're given the power to reward them for it. So most of the messages that come to the diabetics in our system don't come from the system at all. They don't come from our game, they come from another human being. And there's nothing more impactful to our behavior than a human being. Maybe you've experienced this yourself, of slipping into the person's accent that you're speaking to, mimicking their body language. Our mirror neurons make this almost impossible to avoid. We subconsciously pattern ourselves by the people around us. Knowing that there are other people in the space with you who are being successful, doing the things that you need to do, tells you that it's okay, that it's right, that it's possible to be successful, that you should be successful, and this is how you do it. We always keep a background patter of social noise That is, there's always something going on. These are people who are in New York with you right now. They are doing positive things. You can see that it's happening. You can feel like you're part of a space. And in this case, it's virtual cities, but in some cases, we've tied them to physical places. That is, all the people in this community center who have diabetes right now are doing good stuff. It doesn't matter that the people are anonymous to you. You fill in the blanks around these anonymous people if you know that they're real human beings. And children, as I said, respond to this social connectivity especially powerfully. They really care a lot about other people. They care a lot about helping them. And one of the things that we did in this application is you can't actually progress on your own. You have to progress as a group. And so when somebody falls behind, everybody's incented to come and help them, to offer them encouragement, to help them move forward in the space. Making it about them and for them and their own mastery really is important for developing a sense of self-efficacy. Again, all things that you almost never see in healthcare applications, but are kind of gameplay 101. I mean, none of these are really sophisticated from a game design point of view, but we constantly find ourselves hearing about how amazingly innovative it is in healthcare. The only innovation here really is taking what we know works in the game world and applying it to applications that are important. And it's not just about interacting with people who are also patients with you. This peer-oriented interaction is important, but also we include people from your social network that are outside. In 2010, we built an application called Health Seeker. It's a Facebook application. 15,000 type 2 diabetics played it over the course of a year. And we were looking at their behavior. And we noticed something really interesting when we looked at the data. Naturally think of social networks as publishing platforms. Probably because the people who were most successful early on using these social networks were marketers who naturally have publishing-oriented jobs. But in actual fact, the thing that really made the difference to people's behavior was not the messages they sent out. The people who were most adherent, the people who completed the program most, were not people who had sent the most messages. In fact, they seemed to have very little impact on their behavior. It was people who received messages. A person who received at least one message had done on average 3 times as many elements of the program as people who hadn't received one. And the more messages that you received, the more engaged you were. The more you interacted with other human beings, giving you feedback that what you were doing was right and good and okay, and that you were able to be successful at it, the more engaged you felt. And this has been a powerful learning for us and has permeated all of our software that we build now in the healthcare space, is to engineer social connectivity, and even when the legal and regulatory review departments of the companies we work for tell us that we shouldn't do it. It's amazing how hard they work to avoid the one thing that we know for sure works, which is to get people to help other people. But they're kind of frightened of letting human beings talk to other human beings in places where the conversation's not controlled. But it turns out that if you really want to have an impact on people, that's what you have to do. You have to give them the freedom to connect with each other in the way that they want. So let's talk about the future. No, let's talk about the past. Let's talk about this distant past. I just want to leave you this final thought here. I want you to think about, that 200,000-year-old brain of ours, that 200,000-year-old biology. Think of those cave people huddling in their caves, living in a world that seems almost perfectly designed to kill them. Right? They are constantly searching for sustenance in this environment that's very hard to find, constantly avoiding predators that surround them and circle them and see them as nothing but food. And how do you learn? How do you pass along skills? How do you teach your children the right way to behave? How do you hone your own skills for survival in that context? We don't do it this way. That sounds even more terrifying, at least to me. No, they created a game called hide and seek. Perfect way to train those skills. And they survived by playing. Thank you very much.